The desert stretched endlessly under the sinking sun, painted gold and red, its heat still clinging to the dry wind that whispered across the prairie grass. A lone rider moved through the emptiness, dust swirling behind his horse's hooves. He wasn't a man who spoke much, but there was something about his eyes, cold, steady, yet burdened with memory, that told stories no words ever could. The leather of his gloves was worn, his hat tilted low against the glare, and his jaw carried the stillness of someone used to silence. He was a rancher by trade, but life on the frontier had made him something more, a man of grit, patience, and secrets he didn't dare share. He was heading toward the canyon that cut through the land like an old scar. The place was dangerous after dark, but that didn't stop him. He'd gone out searching for a missing mare that had bolted during a thunderstorm the night before. Folks around the settlement often said he cared more for his horses than for people, but that wasn't true. He just didn't trust easily anymore. Not after what happened years back when trust had nearly cost him everything. The air turned cooler as twilight settled in. Coyotes began their distant cries, and the smell of sage drifted through the air. He guided his horse down the rocky slope when suddenly a faint cry carried over the wind. He pulled the reins tight. It came again, weak, desperate, a woman's voice. He kicked his horse forward, heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. When he reached the bend, the sight that met him stole his breath. There, by the base of a mesquite tree, lay a young woman. Her clothes were torn from travel, her hands scraped, and her leg was twisted beneath her awkwardly. One boot was missing, and blood soaked the dirt around her calf. Her face was pale, streaked with sweat and dust. For a second, she didn't notice him. She was too busy trembling, clutching her leg, whispering words he couldn't make out. Then her eyes opened, wide and frightened, as she saw the figure on horseback. He dismounted in a hurry, dropping to his knees beside her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She pointed to her leg, trying to speak, but only gasps came out. Then he saw it, a pair of puncture marks swelling fast on her skin. The veins around it had already turned purple. A rattlesnake bite. He felt his stomach drop. She didn't have much time. Her breathing came fast, her face glistening with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It bit me, and I can't feel my leg." He tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it above the wound, his hand steady though his mind raced. There wasn't a doctor within miles, and the nearest homestead was hours away. He'd seen men die from snakebite before, painful, helpless deaths under the open sky. He couldn't let that happen to her. She gripped his arm with shaking fingers. "You have to suck out the venom," she said, barely able to speak. Her lips quivered as she added, "It's really swollen." Her plea hit him like a storm. He looked at the wound again, red and angry against her pale skin. He knew what needed to be done, but for a moment he hesitated. Not because he feared the act, but because of what it meant. It was the kind of closeness he hadn't allowed himself in years, not since loss had hardened his heart. But her breathing was getting shallower, and hesitation wasn't a luxury he could afford. He bent down, pressing his lips to the wound, drawing out the venom the only way he knew. The bitter taste filled his mouth as he spat into the dirt. He worked fast, repeating the motion again and again, until he saw the swelling ease slightly. The woman's trembling slowed, her breathing steadied, and her eyes fluttered shut from exhaustion. He tied the wound again with cloth, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of his hand. His heart still raced, but for the first time that night, he felt hope. When he leaned back, catching his breath, she opened her eyes faintly and whispered, "Thank you." There was something in her gaze, a mix of trust and something unspoken, that made his chest tighten. He tried to speak, but no words came. The moon was rising now, washing everything in pale light. He could see her better, the dirt on her skin, the way her hair stuck to her face, and yet beneath it all a kind of quiet strength. She wasn't from around here, that much was clear. Her clothes, though torn, were finely stitched, not the kind worn by settlers or ranch hands. Whoever she was, she'd been running from something, or someone. He looked around, scanning the desert shadows. "How did you end up out here alone?" he asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then she closed her eyes, as if even speaking was too much effort. He knew she needed rest, but danger was never far on nights like this. Coyotes, bandits, or worse, men who hunted travelers for what little they carried. He couldn't stay out in the open. He lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest, and carried her to his horse. She was lighter than he expected, fragile but not weak. He could feel her faint heartbeat against his arm. He mounted carefully, holding her close as he guided the horse toward his cabin several miles east. The ride was silent except for the wind and the rhythmic thud of hooves on dirt. Every now and then she stirred and whispered something he couldn't make out, as if caught between sleep and pain. When they finally reached the cabin, the fire from the night before had long gone cold. He laid her on his cot and covered her with his blanket, lighting a lamp that filled the room with a soft glow. Her face looked peaceful now, though her leg was still swollen. He cleaned the wound again, added crushed herbs from his shelf and bandaged it tight. The old ways worked better than most doctors. He'd learned that from his father. Still, he wasn't sure if it would be enough. He sat beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet. The night felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't just been lost. Someone had chased her. Her boots, her bruises, the broken strap on her satchel, it all told a story. And as he reached to adjust the blanket, something slipped from her grasp. A small silver locket, tarnished and old. He picked it up and opened it under the lamplight. Inside was a picture of a man in uniform. The details were worn, but he could still make out the insignia of a cavalry officer. The same regiment that once burned half this valley during the border conflicts. His heart froze. He knew that mark too well. It was the same one from the soldiers who had taken everything from him years ago. His home, his family, his peace. The very same men he had sworn never to forgive. He stared at her sleeping face torn between confusion and anger. Who was she? A soldier's wife? A runaway from the same people who destroyed his life? The irony burned deep inside him. He'd just saved the life of someone tied to his past, and fate had brought her to his doorstep. Maybe mercy was a cruel thing in this world. Or maybe it was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. The wind howled against the cabin walls, and he stood by the window, watching the dark hills in the distance. Somewhere out there a storm was brewing, not of weather but of reckoning. He didn't know if she'd wake and tell him the truth, or if more men would come searching for her before dawn. But one thing was certain, his quiet life on the ranch was about to change, and when she finally opened her eyes again, nothing in that cabin, or in his heart, would ever be the same. The rancher didn't sleep that night. He sat near the small window of the cabin, rifle resting across his knees, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. The lamp flickered softly behind him, throwing his shadow long against the wooden walls. The woman slept restlessly, her body turning slightly as if haunted by dreams she couldn't escape. Every so often she would mumble a word or two, names maybe or half-formed cries, but he couldn't make them out. The only thing he knew for certain was that she wasn't just a wanderer who had gotten lost. Trouble had driven her here. Trouble always did. Outside, the prairie wind had picked up, moaning through the cracks of the cabin. He knew that sound well. It always came before a storm or before something worse. He thought about the locket again, about the man's face inside it, and how much rage had burned in him the moment he recognized that uniform. The cavalry had once swept through this valley, calling it justice, but he had seen what their justice meant. Homes burned, families broken, and men like him left with nothing but scars. If this woman was part of that world, fate was playing a cruel game by putting her under his roof. As dawn began to pale the sky, he stepped outside, letting the cold air hit his face. His horse grazed near the corral, snorting quietly. Everything was still. The land looked peaceful, but peace in the frontier was a thin layer stretched over chaos. He filled a bucket from the well and went back inside. The woman stirred when he entered. Her eyes opened slowly, the color of dawn itself, soft but uncertain. For a moment she didn't seem to remember where she was. Then her gaze found him, and she drew back slightly, her hand going to the bandage on her leg. "You're safe," he said, setting the water down. His voice was calm but guarded. "You were bitten by a rattler. I took care of it." She blinked, confusion and gratitude crossing her face all at once. "You saved me?" she asked quietly. He gave a short nod. "Would have been dead before sunrise if I hadn't found you." She sat up slowly, wincing from the pain in her leg. Her eyes swept the room, the rough-hewn furniture, the firewood stacked by the stove, the faint smell of horses and tobacco. "Where am I?" she asked. "About 10 miles from the settlement," he said. "My land runs through here. You're in my cabin." There was silence for a moment. Then she looked down, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "I didn't mean to trouble you," she said softly. "You didn't," he replied. Though his tone didn't carry warmth, he poured her some water and handed it over. She hesitated before taking it, watching him carefully as if trying to read his thoughts. Something about her manner told him she wasn't used to relying on strangers. She had the composure of someone who had been through hardship before. "You were running from something," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on her. Who was after you? Her hand trembled slightly and she looked away. I don't know what you mean, she said. But her voice betrayed her. It cracked halfway through, giving her away. He didn't press her, not yet. Instead, he turned to stoke the fire. You can rest a while, he said. Storm's coming anyway. Roads will be washed by noon. She nodded but didn't lie back down. Her gaze drifted to the window where the clouds were gathering low and dark. The silence stretched between them, thick with questions neither wanted to ask. As the morning went on, the wind grew stronger, rattling the shutters. The rancher busied himself with chores, chopping wood and checking on the horses. Each time he stepped back inside, he caught her watching him, studying him, maybe trying to understand what kind of man he was. When he finally spoke again, it was to break the tension that had settled heavy between them. You got a name? He asked. She hesitated, then said, Claire. He gave a faint nod, not sure if he believed it. You can call me whatever you like, he said. Most folks just call me the rancher. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for helping me, she said after a moment. You didn't have to, he shrugged. Would have been cruel not to. But you should tell me the truth, Claire. You were out there alone, miles from any trail. That don't happen by accident. She took a deep breath as if weighing her words. I was trying to get away, she admitted finally. From the fort south of here. His head turned sharply at that. The cavalry fort? He asked. She nodded slowly. My husband was stationed there. The room seemed to shrink around them. He didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them grew tense, the fire popping in the silence. He's not coming after me, she added quickly, almost too quickly. He's gone. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away. They told me he was killed on patrol 2 weeks ago. The rancher looked at her quietly, his jaw tightening. And now you're running from soldiers? He asked. Not from them, she whispered. From what they did. Her words hung in the air like smoke. She turned her face away, her shoulders trembling slightly. He didn't ask for more. He'd seen that kind of pain before, the kind that didn't need explaining. Still, a part of him wanted to know, wanted to understand why fate had sent her here. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and the first drops of rain hit the roof. By midday, the storm had turned fierce. Sheets of rain hammered against the cabin, and water streamed off the eaves in silver lines. Inside, the fire burned bright, casting a warm glow that couldn't quite chase off the unease. Claire sat near the hearth wrapped in a blanket, her eyes lost in the flames. He sat across from her, sharpening a knife on a whetstone, though his mind was miles away. Every time he looked at her, the image of that locket flashed before him, the face of the soldier, the symbol of the regiment. He wondered if she knew what it meant to him, if she knew that by saving her, he might have reopened wounds he thought long buried. As the hours passed, the storm eased. The land outside shimmered under the fading rain. He stepped out to check the corral again, and that's when he saw them. Hoof prints, fresh ones leading up from the creek bed, too heavy to be strays. His gut clenched. Someone had been here recently. He knelt, running his fingers through the wet mud. 4, maybe 5 riders. Their tracks were deep, men carrying weight, maybe armed. He followed them a few yards until he saw where they turned back toward the ridge. They hadn't come close enough to spot the cabin, but they were close enough to be looking for something, or someone. When he went back inside, she looked up, worry flickering in her eyes. What is it? She asked. Riders, he said simply. They were tracking near the creek. Didn't come this way yet. Her face went pale and he saw the fear she tried to hide. They're looking for me, she said quietly. They know I ran. He stared at her, his patience worn thin. You need to start telling me the truth, Claire. Why are men from the fort after you? She pressed her hands together, shaking slightly. Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to, she said finally. Her voice was low, trembling but certain. My husband was killed because of it. They said it was an ambush, but it wasn't. It was a setup. Men he trusted betrayed him, and when I tried to tell the commander, they came after me too. Her words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. I ran before they could silence me. The rancher took a step back, running a hand through his hair. The truth settled heavy in his chest. He'd always believed the army carried the stain of corruption, but hearing it now from someone tied to it made his blood run cold. And what did they want to hide, he asked. She looked up at him, her expression breaking into quiet despair. Gold, she said. They found it in the hills near the border. It was supposed to be government property, but some of the officers wanted to keep it. My husband tried to stop them. That's why they killed him. He turned away, staring out the window. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with tension. How much gold? He asked quietly. Enough to make men do anything, she said. He didn't respond. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance. He could feel the weight of fate pressing in. The woman in his cabin had just drawn him into a fight he'd tried to leave behind years ago. When he finally looked back at her, her face was pale, her eyes full of fear. You can still send me away if you want, she said softly. I'll try to make it on my own. But he didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the rifle leaning against the wall, then back to her. You won't make it far, he said. Not if those men are who I think they are. She swallowed hard, realizing what his words meant. The rancher moved to the door, closing it tight against the wind. You'll stay here tonight, he said. But you better pray they don't find us before morning. Night fell hard and quick, the kind that swallows sound and leaves a man speaking in whispers even when he is alone. He checked the shutters again and placed a second bar across the door. Claire watched from the chair by the hearth, both hands around a tin cup that steamed gently. The bite on her leg had lost its angry shine, though the skin remained tight and warm. Every so often she reached toward the locket on the table as if to close it, then left it open, the face inside watching them both like a quiet judge. The rancher fed the fire, kept the kettle near, and moved with the calm of a man who had ridden through worse nights and lived to see dawn. That calm was only surface. Beneath it ran a current that tugged at old wounds. He told her the truth at last, not the full ledger, but enough to set the ground between them. Years back, when he was younger and the valley was a promise instead of a scar, he had ridden fence for a neighbor and kept to himself. Then the cavalry came hunting raiders. Orders were sharp and righteous. By morning, 3 homes were ash and 2 boys were gone. The men who carried that standard were proud of their work. Some of them laughed. He buried what could be buried and walked away from the pieces of his old life. That is what the uniform in the locket meant to him. It was not just cloth. It was a weight. Thunder rolled again. They both listened, then heard another sound underneath, faint and regular, metal on leather. He lifted a hand and the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Hooves. Not many. 2, maybe 3. The riders passed on the far side of the ridge, their rhythm fading after a minute. He kept his voice low. They are checking the draws, he said. They will keep a circle, then widen it when the light comes. She nodded and pulled the blanket closer. By first light, the sky was a pale strip over the eastern hills. He saddled his horse and brought another from the corral, a steady roan with a good heart. He told Claire they might need to move if the riders doubled back. She tried to stand, grimaced, and braced against the chair. He cut a short length from an old broom handle and shaved it smooth for a crutch. She tested it, jaw tight, and managed 3 steps. He saw how hard she fought not to show pain and respected her for it. Before they left the yard, he walked the fence line to the spring that fed his troughs. The ground there told a story to any man who knew how to listen. A boot print with a square heel, a broken twig where a rider had leaned down to check the water, a twist of tobacco in the mud. He looked toward the cottonwoods on the far side and found a second set of tracks that peeled off toward the wagon road. That second set was lighter, different shoes. He crouched longer over those. The gate said a boy or a small man, someone traveling on foot, someone trying not to be seen. He followed that lighter trail to where it cut behind a low shale outcrop, then rose and whistled once, low and friendly. A head popped up like a prairie dog. The boy could not have been more than 13, stringy and nervous, hair matted from the night rain. He held a slingshot in one hand as if it were a rifle. The rancher motioned with an open palm. Easy. Nobody is aiming to hurt you. The boy glanced past the rancher toward the cabin, then climbed out, dusting his knees. Name is Eli, he said, too quick, as if rehearsed. Been sleeping rough since spring. I work for feed when a man will have me. The rancher handed him a strip of jerky and studied his eyes. Eli ate like he had not seen meat in a week. After a minute, the story tumbled out. Soldiers had ridden through the settlement 2 days ago, asking after a widow from the fort. Some wore uniforms. Some did not. One had a scar from ear to jaw and a flat smile. They asked at the livery and at the church. They asked in the saloon with their hands on pistols. They said the woman had stolen army property. A storekeeper who knew the rancher sent Eli with a message. If the rancher had found anyone lost in the storm, he should keep his head down. The men were not looking for justice. They were looking to close mouths. The rancher walked the boy to the cabin. Claire stiffened when she saw him, then relaxed when she saw his size. Eli gave her a shy nod and the kind of look that belongs to boys raised too fast. He told her what he had heard in town. Her face went white at the mention of the scar. She said the man with the scar was named Pike and had served under the same captain as her husband. Pike had been the captain's hand for dirty work. If he was here, the others could not be far. Eli added one more thing. The telegraph at the stage stop had carried 3 messages south in quick order. Men in plain coats traveling fast, meeting at the old mission ford. The word ford made the rancher look toward the canyon. That crossing was where contraband moved when men wanted the government blind. He gave Eli a job and a reason to stay, which is sometimes the same thing. The boy would ride to a line shack 10 miles west and leave a sign for a neighbor the rancher trusted, a quiet man named Greeley who did not ask questions. If Eli saw fresh army tracks, he would mark the rock on the ridge with 3 lines and no one would miss the meaning. The rancher saddled the roan for the boy and gave him half a sack of oats and a canteen. Eli set off with a solemn promise to keep his head down. Back in the cabin, the rancher told Claire about Greeley and the few other neighbors a man could count on when trouble rode. He did not say their names, not yet. Trust on the frontiers like water in August. You do not spill it without need. Claire listened and told him more about the officers at the fort. There was a lieutenant with a polished way of speaking who talked often about roads and bridges, yet kept a private ledger. There was a quartermaster whose inventory always balanced on paper, but never in the storehouse. Then there was Pike and 2 hard men who followed him like wolves. She had seen them load canvas sacks into a wagon after sunset. Her husband had confronted them in the yard with 2 sergeants at his side. The lieutenant had smiled and told him the sacks held tools. Later that night, her husband rode patrol to the North Ravine. He did not return. The sergeants were reassigned the next day and would not meet her eyes. The rancher asked a careful question. How do you know about the gold itself? She lifted the locket and pressed it shut. He told me in a note and hid it in the lining of my trunk, she said. He was not a suspicious man by nature, but he had learned. He wrote that he had seen ore pulled from a smuggler's cut near the mission. He wrote that army wagons were diverting it. He wrote that he might be in danger. Her voice wavered on the last line. The note was gone when I returned from the chapel. Only Pike had been in our rooms. She had run not long after, taking only what she could hide beneath her dress and the locket. They spent the rest of the day preparing in small ways that do not draw lightning. He showed her the hidden trap beneath the floorboards where he kept a short carbine and a box of shells. He boiled willow bark for her fever and rigged a brace that would fit her calf without biting the skin. He split dry kindling and stacked it behind the stove in case they needed to keep smoke thin. These are the quiet steps a man takes when quarrel is close. By late afternoon, the sky cleared into a clean, hard blue. The smell after rain makes a person believe the world can be scrubbed right, even when it cannot. He led Claire outside for air and set a chair by the threshold where she could see the cottonwoods and the strip of river beyond. The land carried a look of innocence. She studied it as if to learn it by heart. People in the East talk about the West as if it is a map, she said. Lines and names. But it feels like a story that is bigger than any person. He agreed, and did not say that some stories bite back. They heard riders again just before sundown. This time the rhythm slowed near the creek. He signaled Claire, and she moved inside with the crutch as quietly as the hinge of a prayer. He took the long way through the brush and came up behind the cottonwoods. 3 men, 2 in dusted coats, 1 in uniform. The uniformed one stayed in the saddle, scanning. The others walked the bank, peering at prints that the rain had not fully erased. The officer had soft hands. The coatmen had the gait of men who spend nights awake. When they finished their search, the officer lifted a hand and pointed toward the ridge road. They moved on at a trot. He waited until their dust was a thin ribbon, then returned to the yard. Claire studied his face and knew the answer before he gave it. Army, he said. Not Pike, the lieutenant from your fort, maybe. She looked down. He said he talked about roads and bridges. That man points like he still sees benches and maps when there is only dirt. They ate in silence, then talked through options. Staying put meant the circle would tighten day by day. Running tonight risked stumbling into a patrol. The rancher proposed something different. He would ride out before dawn and scout the mission ford. If there was a meeting place, there would be sign. If there was ore, he might find where it was stashed. Knowledge would buy them a day or take them into a trap. Either way, ignorance would kill them faster. Claire wanted to go, and he forbade it with a soft voice and a firm eye. She accepted, though her hands twisted in the blanket. That night he dreamed what he rarely let himself see. Fire in the meadow. A woman's cry cut short. A boy's boots on dirt as he ran toward a fence that had no gate. He woke before the cry ended with his hand reaching for a rifle that was already there. Claire was awake too, looking at the ceiling. I keep seeing a red scarf caught on a nail, she said. It is the last thing I remember from that yard. He nodded in the dark. Sometimes the smallest piece carries all the weight. Before dawn, he left a note for Claire on the table. If Eli returned, he should ride on to Greeley and tell him the ford was their question. The rancher saddled the lean sorrel he used for hard miles and left the roan in the corral. He took the carbine in a scabbard and a pistol under his coat. He moved without hurry. Men who hurry leave trails that shout. The mission stood on a bluff of pale stone where the river bent east. Most of the roof was gone. A bell lay cracked in the weeds. He tied his horse in the shadow of a collapsed wall and walked the last 100 yards. The ford itself was narrow and knee-deep this time of year. He crouched and read the gravel. Many hooves in recent days. A wagon 2 nights back, heavy. He found a place where men had unloaded near the cottonwoods. The bark bore fresh scrapes at shoulder height, as if a canvas sack had swung and struck when lifted. He followed the marks into the trees and found a cache that was not meant to be permanent. 3 canvas rolls tucked under brush. He cut one open. Inside lay ore like dark bread with yellow veins. He resealed it and put it back. A twig snapped behind him. He turned without flourish, carbine down but ready. The man who stepped into view wore a coat the color of dried clay and a beard cut short. His hands were empty and away from his sides. The rancher knew him in a half-second. Greeley. The neighbor had as many words as a stone, and all of them counted. He said the lieutenant had ridden through at dawn with 5 men, and had asked if Greeley knew where the rancher kept his cattle. Greeley had feigned ignorance and watched with the kind of eyes that do not miss much. He had followed at a distance. The patrol had split near the mission, 2 men crossing the ford, 3 heading for the ridge that overlooked the rancher's land. The lieutenant had gone with the ridge group. The rancher felt his stomach go cold. Claire. He thanked Greeley and did not waste time with more talk. They moved together at a steady clip, cutting across draws and letting the sorrel pick its line. At the last rise, they dismounted and crawled to the lip of the ridge. From there, the cabin was a small square in a sea of brown. 2 riders waited in the cottonwoods on the near bank of the creek. One stood in the yard, his hat in his hand as if he were an invited guest. The hatless man was thin, with shoulders like wire. Even from a distance, the line of his jaw looked wrong, as if a scar had pulled it tight. The rancher's breath went iron-heavy. He counted the men twice, then looked again at the yard. The door was open now. Claire stepped out with the crutch, slow and steady, her chin up. The thin man smiled in a way that carried no kindness. He said something and gestured toward the inside. She did not move. The man reached out as if to take her arm. Greeley's whisper was a stone on the ground. If you shoot now, the creek riders will put lead through that door before your second breath. If you wait, the thin one walks her inside and sets the cage. The rancher kept his cheek welded to the ridge rock and laid the sights of the carbine on the thin man's chest. He could make that shot in wind or in prayer. His finger tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. He could not shake the feeling that another set of eyes waited for his choice, somewhere just beyond what he could see. The lieutenant, Pike, maybe both. Down in the yard, the thin man leaned closer to Claire and said something again. She looked him in the eye and answered. Whatever she said made him pause. He turned his head a fraction, listening as if some new piece had entered his plan. The rancher watched the man's free hand. It moved toward his coat pocket, not his gun. A signal. The 2 riders in the cottonwoods shifted in their saddles. The wind fell silent for the span of a heartbeat. The rancher drew in one long breath and made his choice, a choice that would pull every old promise apart and set the valley on the edge of a blade. He slid the carbine half an inch to the left, sighted not on the thin man now but on the branch above the nearest rider, where a brittle limb hung heavy from the last storm. He set his finger and began to press as the thin man stepped closer to Claire, and the door behind her filled with shadow that did not belong to the house. The rifle cracked once, sharp and clean, breaking the stillness of the valley. The branch above the rider snapped and came crashing down, startling the horses. One reared back with a terrified cry, and both riders ducked for cover. In that instant of chaos, the rancher moved. He rolled to his knee, chambered another round, and fired toward the ridge behind the cottonwoods, not aiming to kill but to scatter. The echo carried for miles. Greeley was already moving, sliding down the slope, keeping low among the rocks. Below, the thin man with the scar yanked Claire toward the cabin, his calm broken at last. She stumbled but fought him, swinging the crutch hard enough to strike his side. He cursed, shoving her forward through the door. The rancher's world narrowed to motion and sound. The rush of hooves, the ring of metal, the steady rhythm of his breath. He darted through the brush, crossing the shallow creek in 2 long strides. Bullets hissed into the mud near his boots. He could see Pike now, clear as daylight, standing in the doorway with his gun drawn, shouting orders to the others. Claire was inside. The window beside the door flickered with movement, her shadow quick and tense. The rancher ducked behind the water trough, mud cold against his palms, waiting for the right moment. Inside the cabin, Claire's heart hammered so hard she could barely think. Pike had forced her into a chair, his pistol resting on the table as if he owned the place. 2 soldiers stood behind him, one near the back door, one by the window.
The lieutenant from the fort paced slowly near the fireplace, his polished boots tapping the floor.
He looked out of place here, like a man who thought he could tame wild land with orders in ink. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble, Mrs. Everett," he said smoothly, hands clasped behind his back. "You should have stayed where you belonged." Claire glared at him, refusing to lower her eyes. "Where I belonged was beside my husband," she said. "You made sure that couldn't happen." Pike's grin stretched thin. "Careful," he said, his voice cold. "Truth gets dangerous this far from the fort." The lieutenant ignored him, looking at the locket still hanging around her neck. "You have something that belongs to the government," he said. "A note, a map, whatever it is. Give it to us, and this ends quietly." "I don't have it," she said, shaking her head. "You took it already." The lieutenant smiled without warmth. "You'll forgive me if I don't take your word for that." He nodded to Pike. "Search the place." Pike moved toward the chest by the bed, kicking it open and tossing blankets aside. His movements were rough, methodical. Claire's hand trembled around the armrest. She knew if they didn't find what they wanted, they'd take her back to the fort. Or worse. Outside, the rancher caught sight of movement through the cracks in the shutters. Pike's shadow passed near the window, gun low at his side. The lieutenant was behind him, his attention fixed on Claire. The second soldier leaned lazily against the wall by the door, his rifle hanging loose. The rancher took a slow breath, raised his carbine, and fired through the thin boards. The soldier dropped before he hit the ground. Pike spun toward the sound, shouting, "He's here!" The lieutenant ducked, and chaos erupted. The rancher stormed through the back door, shoving it open with his shoulder. The smell of gunpowder filled the room. Pike fired once, the bullet splintering the wood near the stove. The rancher dove to the side, returning a shot that hit the edge of the table, sending sparks flying. Claire crawled behind the bed, pulling the blanket with her. Greeley burst in through the front a moment later, rifle steady. The remaining soldier panicked, dropping his weapon and diving through the window. Pike's next shot grazed Greeley's arm, drawing blood. The rancher fired again, this time hitting Pike square in the shoulder. The outlaw staggered back, the pistol falling from his hand. "You can't stop this," Pike hissed, clutching the wound. "You don't even know what you're in the middle of." The lieutenant raised his hand slowly, his face pale but calculating. "Let's not make this worse than it has to be," he said. "You don't understand the stakes." The rancher stepped closer, his weapon trained on the officer's chest. "I understand enough. You killed her husband for gold, and now you're trying to bury it." The lieutenant's expression didn't change. "That gold is property of the army," he said quietly. "It's not yours, not hers, not anyone's to expose. You think the law will side with a rancher and a runaway widow? You'd both hang before they listened." His words carried a terrible truth. The law in these parts bent toward whoever had the most guns and the biggest payroll. Before anyone could answer, a shout came from outside. Eli's voice, high and desperate. "Riders coming fast from the south!" The rancher cursed under his breath. "Reinforcements." Pike gave a grim smile. "Looks like the cavalry's on time for once." The rancher knocked him to the floor with the butt of his rifle. "Tie them," he told Greeley, who tore strips of rope from the feed sack and bound the lieutenant's hands. Claire limped toward the window and peered out. Dust clouds rose over the ridge. At least 6 riders, all armed. The rancher's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. The cabin would be a coffin once the soldiers surrounded it. He turned to Claire. "You remember that old creek bed behind the corral?" She nodded. "It runs straight to the canyon." "Good," he said. "You'll take Eli and follow it. Greeley and I will hold them off long enough for you to get a head start." She shook her head. "No, I won't leave you." He looked at her, the words hard but gentle. "If they catch you, everything dies with you. The truth, your husband's name, all of it. Go." Outside, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Greeley passed him another rifle, jaw clenched against the pain in his arm. They took positions near the window, counting the seconds. The air smelled of rain and iron, the kind of scent that comes before something breaks. The first soldiers came into view, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. Claire hesitated one last time, her hand brushing the rancher's arm. "If you don't come back," she whispered, "they'll never know what kind of man you were." He met her eyes. Then make them know. She slipped out the back door, Eli close behind her. The riders spread out across the yard, their horses kicking up dirt. The lieutenant, still tied, began to shout from inside, "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" But his men didn't listen. The first shot came from the ridge, striking the porch post. Wood splinters rained across the floor. Greeley returned fire, hitting one rider's leg. The man tumbled from his horse screaming. The rest fanned out, taking cover behind rocks and fallen timber. The cabin shuddered with every impact as bullets tore through the walls. The rancher moved like a ghost from window to window, firing only when he saw a clear mark. His jaw was set, eyes steady. He knew they couldn't win, but they could buy time. Beside him, Greeley was bleeding worse now, his breath coming short. "Don't worry about me," the old ranch hand muttered. "Just keep them guessing." The rancher nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. Each shot echoed in his bones, each reload slower than the last. Beyond the cabin, Claire and Eli scrambled through the brush, the storm clouds low above them. She could hear the gunfire behind her, each report cutting into her heart. Eli kept looking back, his face pale. "He's still fighting," he whispered. "He will," she said. "He always will." But deep down she feared how many men one person could stand against. She forced herself forward, following the narrow trail that led to the canyon, praying the creek bed would hide them. Back at the cabin, the gunfire reached a fever pitch. The rancher ducked behind the stove as bullets struck the window frame. Smoke filled the room from the burning oil lamp that had been knocked over. The lieutenant shouted again for his men to stop firing, but Pike, still half-conscious, laughed from the corner. "You can't stop them now," he croaked. "They want what's buried more than they want orders." The roof cracked under a hit, dust and splinters raining down. The rancher turned to Greeley, whose strength was fading fast. "Get out the back," he said. "I'll draw them in." Greeley gripped his arm weakly. "You can't take them all." "I don't have to," the rancher replied. "Just enough to give her a chance." He kicked over the table for cover and threw the door open, stepping into the storm of bullets. The sudden movement caught the soldiers off guard. He fired twice, hitting one man squarely and forcing the others to scatter. He moved toward the corral, ducking low, firing again and again until his rifle clicked empty. The smell of powder and dust filled the air. Lightning flashed far off over the hills, painting the valley in ghostly light. In that flash, he saw Pike crawling toward the fallen pistol. The man's face was twisted with hate and pain. "You think you can save her?" Pike snarled. "You're too late." The rancher swung the rifle up like a club, knocking the weapon from Pike's grasp. "You already took one life," he said coldly. "You don't get another." Pike spat blood and laughed. "You can't fight the whole army." From the ridge, a bugle sounded, high and shrill, a signal to advance. More riders were coming, their outlines faint against the horizon. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder chasing lightning. The rancher's pulse pounded. He knew this was it, the line between survival and surrender. The ground trembled under the weight of horses, the air alive with the promise of violence. He looked back once toward the canyon, where he prayed Claire was still running, and raised his rifle again, ready to face whatever came over that ridge. The night held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The storm came down from the hills like a living thing, wind whipping through the canyon and rain cutting across the valley in silver sheets. The sound of hooves echoed closer, the bugle still ringing in the rancher's ears. He stood alone in the open yard, rifle tight in his grip, eyes fixed on the ridge. The night was full of smoke and thunder, yet all he felt was the heavy calm of a man who had made peace with his choice. Behind him, the cabin burned faintly where a lamp had fallen, its glow casting long shadows across the dirt. He could still hear Claire's last words, soft but certain, echoing in his chest. "Make them know who you were." The first riders broke through the darkness, their torches flickering like fireflies in a storm. He counted 6, then 8. The lieutenant's men had called for reinforcements faster than he expected. He ducked behind the corral, rain soaking his hat, and reloaded the last of his rounds. The horses screamed as bullets struck near the fence. He returned fire, each shot deliberate, measured. One rider fell, another's horse bolted into the brush. The rest fanned out, trying to flank him. He could feel his strength fading, but his will held steady. Every breath, every trigger pull was one more second for Claire and Eli to get farther away. Then he heard a familiar voice cut through the gunfire. "Hold your fire!" By order of Captain Harlan. The shout came from behind the advancing riders. The line wavered. Men glanced toward the new voice. A group of mounted figures appeared from the north, their horses moving in disciplined formation. The lead rider dismounted, A tall man in a rain-soaked coat, the insignia of a senior officer gleaming faintly on his chest. The fighting stopped as both sides froze in confusion. The rancher stayed low, unsure if this was friend or foe. The new officer raised a lantern, his face half hidden by rain. "Lieutenant Briggs," he barked, "explain yourself. Why is my patrol firing on civilians?" The surviving lieutenant stumbled forward, soaked and pale. "Sir, that man harbored a fugitive, an army widow accused of treason. She stole property from the quartermaster's stores." The captain's eyes narrowed. "And that justifies an ambush?" "I received no such warrant." While the lieutenant stammered, the rancher stepped out from behind the corral, rifle lowered but ready. His clothes were torn, his hands trembling, but his gaze was steady. "She didn't steal anything," he said, voice rough from smoke and dust. "She was running from the men who killed her husband." "Men under your command," the soldiers murmured among themselves. The captain turned sharply. "Watch your tongue, rancher." The rancher took a slow step forward, pointing toward the lieutenant. "Search his coat. You'll find the proof." The captain hesitated, then nodded to a sergeant. The man stepped forward, reaching into Briggs's coat pocket. When he pulled his hand back, it held a small folded paper wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. The sergeant opened it under the lantern light. It was a note, written in a firm, fading hand. The captain's face changed as he read. His jaw set and he looked at the lieutenant with quiet fury. "This is signed by Captain Everett," he said, voice like thunder. "Your commanding officer, the man you claimed was killed in an ambush." The lieutenant's composure shattered. He tried to speak, but no words came. Pike, still bleeding in the mud near the porch, gave a weak laugh. "Told you the past don't stay buried," he said, coughing up blood. The captain's gaze was sharp as a blade. "Arrest him. And the others who rode with him. They'll answer for this before a court." Soldiers moved fast, disarming the lieutenant and his remaining men. The captain turned to the rancher. "You've got a right to be angry," he said quietly. "But justice won't come from gunfire. It'll come from truth." The rancher nodded once, his breath unsteady. "Then let it start now." He told the captain everything. The gold hidden at the mission, the men who'd conspired to steal it, and how Claire's husband had died trying to stop them. The captain listened in silence, his eyes dark with thought. When the rancher finished, the captain motioned to his men. "Recover the ore, every piece of it." Then he looked back at the rancher. "And the woman, where is she now?" The rancher hesitated, then said, "Safe. Far from here." The captain gave a single nod. "Good. Let her stay that way." By morning, the storm had passed. Smoke drifted lazily from the cabin ruins, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. The arrested men were marched off under guard, their faces blank with defeat. Pike was gone before sunrise, his body buried in the shallow wash where the rain ran thick. The lieutenant refused to speak another word, eyes hollow as the canyon sky. The rancher stood by the fence, watching them disappear into the horizon. The world felt strangely quiet now, as if holding its breath after a long scream. Greeley limped out from the barn, his arm bandaged tight. "You're still standing," he said with a tired grin. "Can't say the same for your roof." The rancher gave a faint smile. "Roof can be fixed." He looked at the smoldering remains of the cabin, the place that had been both home and battleground. "Everything can be fixed," he added softly, though part of him knew some scars never fade. Greeley nodded toward the trail. "You going after her?" The rancher didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the canyon where the creek wound like a silver thread. "She deserves peace," he said finally. "If she found it, I won't take it from her." A few days passed before he saddled his horse again. The valley had returned to its quiet rhythm, the sound of wind through sagebrush, the distant call of a hawk. The army had left, the gold was gone to wherever men send things they can't keep, and the world had shifted back to its lonely balance. But he couldn't shake the feeling that one last chapter was unfinished. He packed light, water, jerky, and a single letter sealed in rough paper, and followed the canyon path east. He found her 2 days later near a small camp by the river. Eli was tending the fire, his face lighting up when he saw the familiar horse. Claire rose slowly from where she sat, the locket still around her neck. For a long moment they said nothing, the silence between them full of everything that had passed. Then she smiled faintly. "I didn't think I'd see you again." He dismounted and handed her the letter. "It's from the captain," he said. "Official word clearing your husband's name. They'll mark him a hero." Her eyes filled with tears as she held the paper. "He was," she whispered. They just needed someone to tell them. Eli poked at the fire, pretending not to watch. The rancher sat beside her, the weight of days finally lifting from his shoulders. The men who did it won't trouble anyone again, he said. Justice found them in its own way, she nodded, eyes shining in the firelight. And you? She asked softly. What will you do now? He looked at the horizon, where the last light of sunset turned the sky gold. Build again, he said simply. Maybe start over. That's all a man can do. She reached out, touching his hand lightly. You gave me my life back, she said. Twice. He shook his head. You were the one who kept running when it mattered. You did that yourself. The air between them was warm and still, filled with the quiet understanding that some bonds didn't need words to last. When he finally rose to leave, she stood too, leaning on the crutch he had carved. Will I see you again? She asked. He hesitated, then smiled. This land's wide, but the wind carries news. If you ever hear it whisper my name, you'll know I'm still riding somewhere. He mounted and turned his horse toward the open plain. The river glowed behind him, reflecting the firelight from her camp. As he rode away, he looked back once, seeing her silhouette framed by the soft light of dawn, the woman who had walked through loss and found courage in the ashes. She lifted a hand and he tipped his hat in return. The trail stretched endless ahead of him, the kind of road that never promises peace but offers a chance at it. By midday, he reached the high ridge overlooking the valley. The wind carried the scent of rain and grass, clean and sharp. Below him lay the land he had fought to protect, a patch of soil, sky, and memory bound together by blood and mercy. He drew in a long breath, feeling the weight lift from his chest. The world was still wild, still cruel at times, but for the first time in years it didn't feel empty. He turned his horse west and started down the trail again, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. And somewhere behind him, far off in the quiet folds of the canyon, the locket's faint shine caught the morning light. Proof that even the harshest land can remember kindness when the storm has passed.